What was it like to party in Great Britain in the 1990s? A decade that transformed how an entire nation partied. But here's what most people don't know. The roots of today's billion-pound festival industry and global DJ superstardom were born in abandoned warehouses and farmers' fields, fueled by chemical enhancement and good old British rebellion. The authorities called it criminal. The participants called it freedom. History would call it revolutionary. British party scene didn't just appear overnight, it was the love child of individualism and post-industrial decay. As the decade dawned, Britain was a nation of empty warehouses, abandoned factories, and young people with energy to burn. The traditional working-class institutions, the unions, the local pub, the community centre, were crumbling. In their place rose something entirely new, a DIY party culture that would define a generation. London led the charge, naturally. The capital's vast network of derelict industrial spaces became playgrounds for a new breed of party promoter. These weren't your typical nightclub owners in shiny suits counting door takings. These were kids with mobile phones, the brick-sized ones, a mate with a sound system, and the audacity to break into buildings that had been left to rot since the manufacturing exodus of the 80s. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is something your average documentary won't tell you. The authorities initially had no idea how to handle it. The Public Order Act of 1986 was designed to deal with football hooligans and political protests, not 5,000 people dancing in a field. The police would show up to shut down a rave only to find their radios jammed by the same pirate stations advertising the party. Some coppers even admitted years later that they'd occasionally just park up and enjoy the music from their patrol cars. If you're enjoying this journey back to the 90s party scene, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what's coming next about the Underground Rave Network will blow your mind. But first, let's talk about the music that made people risk arrest just to dance. The Criminal Justice Act of 1994 famously tried to ban gatherings where music, wholly or predominantly characterized by the emission of a succession of repetitive beats, was played. Imagine trying to legislate against a drum pattern. But the music of 90s Britain was so much more than that patronizing description suggests. In Manchester, the Haçienda nightclub was ground zero for the Manchester scene. The Stone Roses, Happy Mondays and Inspiral Carpets weren't just bands, they were cultural movements. The fusion of indie rock with dance beats created something uniquely British. These weren't the polished disco tracks of Studio 54. This was raw, often badly mixed, but absolutely electric. London had jungle and drum and bass brewing in clubs like Blue Note and AWOL. The beats were faster than anything America was producing, often hitting 180 BPM. Goldie, Groove Rider and LTJ Buchan weren't just DJs, they were sonic architects building new worlds at 45 RPM. The bass lines were so heavy that clubs had to reinforce their walls. True story, the legendary Club UK in Wandsworth had to install special shock absorbers because neighbouring businesses complained their computers were crashing from the vibrations. Meanwhile, Sheffield was birthing UK garage in sweaty basements. Bristol was creating trip-hop in smoke-filled lounges, and Glasgow's Subclub was pushing techno so hard that Carl Cox called it harder than Detroit. Each city had its sound, its uniform, its drugs of choice, and its attitude. Let's talk about what people actually wore to these parties, because the fashion was as revolutionary as the music. Early 90s rave fashion was anti-fashion. Baggy jeans so wide you could fit another person in them, t-shirts with that ubiquitous smiley face, and trainers that would be worth thousands on Depop today. The bucket hat wasn't just practical for hiding dilated pupils from the police, it became a symbol of the scene. Brands like Joe Bloggs and Geo Goy went from Manchester market stalls to must-have labels. The key was comfort and practicality. You were going to be dancing for 8 hours straight, possibly in a field, definitely sweating buckets. But here's what's fascinating. As the decade progressed and superclubs emerged, the fashions split into tribes. The garage scene brought designer labels. Suddenly, working-class kids from South London were spending their entire week's wages on a Moschino shirt for Sunday night at twice as nice. The jungle scene kept it real with military surplus and sportswear. The trance hippies went full tie-dye and UV reactive everything. While London grabbed headlines, the real innovation was happening in the regions. Manchester didn't just have the Haçienda, it had an entire ecosystem. The Thunderdome, Conspiracy and Paradise Factory operated like a rave university system. You'd start at one, get the flyer for the next, and before you knew it, you hadn't seen daylight for 48 hours. The Haçienda itself deserves special mention. Built in a former yacht warehouse, it hemorrhaged money for years until Acid House arrived. Then, every Wednesday at Hot and every Friday at Nude, it became the most important nightclub in Europe. The sprung dance floor literally bounced as 1,400 people jumped in unison. Factory Records' Tony Wilson famously said he spent millions keeping it open, joking that every punter was subsidised by New Order album sales. Birmingham's Quay Club was so influential that it basically invented the superclub concept. They had a swimming pool, for crying out loud, in a nightclub in Birmingham. It was pure decadence in a city still scarred by industrial decline. But Birmingham's scene ran deeper than one superclub. The Institute's Friday nights pulled coaches from across the Midlands. House of God at the Hummingbird brought punk attitude to techno, with residents like Surgeon creating sounds so industrial they made Detroit look soft. The city's multiculturalism meant Bhangra house fusion nights where Punjabi MC met Paul Oakenfold, creating combinations you'd never hear in London's more segregated scenes. Sheffield, the Steel City, birthed bassline house in clubs like Niche, where teenagers in Burberry created their own sound. Faster than garage, harder than house, uniquely northern. Bristol's Lakota was a sprawling complex where drum and bass evolved in real time, with Ronnie Size and the Full Cycle crew turning a post-industrial wasteland into a laboratory for the future. Newcastle's Shindig fought the London-centric media to prove the Geordie Party spirit could match anyone, while Liverpool's Quadrant Park housed 3,000 scallies losing their minds to the hardest house music in Britain. Here's something mental. Leeds had a club called The Gallery that was so legendary, people would travel from London just to experience their vague night. That's right, Londoners admitting somewhere else did it better. The Gallery opened in 1995 in a former Victorian music hall, and what made it special wasn't just the restored Baroque ceiling or the fact they kept the original theatre boxes as VIP areas. It was the sound system, a custom-built 40,000-watt setup that Dave Beer, the resident DJ, personally tuned every week. The bass was so precise that ravers claimed they could feel different frequencies massaging different organs. Scientists from Leeds University actually studied the acoustic properties and found the venue created standing waves that physically moved through dancers' bodies. But the Gallery represented something bigger. The northern defiance of London centricity. While the capital's clubs fought over international DJ bookings, the Gallery built a family of residents who understood exactly what made Yorkshire crowds different. They played harder, faster, more relentless than their southern counterparts. The vague night became a masterclass in programming, starting with deep house, building through progressive trance and climaxing with hard techno that would have cleared London dance floors, but had Leeds begging for more. The orbital rave phenomenon deserves its own documentary. Picture this. Convoys of hundreds of cars circling London's M25 motorway, mobile phones glued to ears waiting for the final location. Service stations became gathering points where thousands of ravers would converge, following cryptic instructions from pirate radio. The police would set up roadblocks at one junction only to watch helplessly as the convoy diverted to another exit. It was urban warfare fought with A to Z maps and CB radios, where the weapons were sound systems and the territory was anywhere with a postcode. Still with us? Well then, this is a perfect time to hit subscribe and share this video with your friends. The relationship between ravers and the law was like Tom and Jerry, if Tom was wearing a high-vis jacket and Jerry was off his face on Mitsubishis. The entertainments increased penalties, Act 1990 was the first attempt to crack down, raising fines for unlicensed parties to £20,000. The ravers' response? Charge 50p entry instead of £15 and call it a political gathering. Pay party units were established. Special police forces dedicated to stopping raves. They had intelligence officers, helicopter support, and even psychological warfare tactics. But the ravers had technology. Mobile phones, still rare in 1990, became essential kit. Pager networks buzzed with coded locations. Pirate radio stations like Centreforce and Fantasy FM didn't just play banging tunes. They were communication networks that would make modern WhatsApp groups look primitive. The most controversial aspect? The drugs. Let's not dance around it. MDMA fueled the scene. But here's what your hand-wringing documentaries won't tell you. The first wave of ecstasy in Britain was remarkably pure. The real dangers came later when prohibition drove manufacturing underground and dodgy pills flooded the market. The tragic deaths at raves weren't from the music or even the drugs per se. They were from prohibition creating an unregulated market and venues so illegal they couldn't provide basic safety measures like free water. The illegal warehouse scene was genuinely utopian for about 3 years. Picture this: derelict buildings in King's Cross, Hackney and Vauxhall transformed into temporary autonomous zones. No door policy, no dress code, no attitude. Company directors danced next to squatters. Football firms that would kick off in the streets hugged it out on the dance floor. Biology and world dance in the Midlands threw parties so legendary that people still talk about them in hushed tones. These weren't just parties, they were happenings. Art installations, chill-out rooms with ambient DJs, healing spaces with massage therapists. I know, very 90s. The production values at these illegal parties often exceeded legal clubs because the promoters were doing it for love, not money, but it couldn't last. As Irvine Welsh wrote, "The first summer of love was magical, the second was chemical, the third was criminal." By 1993, organised crime had noticed the money in muddy fields, and the beautiful chaos got a lot less beautiful and a lot more chaotic. As the illegal scene became too hot, something strange happened. The rebels became entrepreneurs. Cream in Liverpool, Renaissance in Derby, Gatecrasher in Sheffield. These weren't just nightclubs, they were brands. They had merchandise. People wore Cream hoodies to school. Ministry of Sound opened in 1991 in a Southwark warehouse, deliberately styled after New York's Paradise Garage. But within 5 years, it was a global brand, with compilation albums selling millions. The DJs who'd played for petrol money and pills were suddenly earning $5,000 a night. Paul Oakenfold, Carl Cox, Judge Jules, they became the first DJ superstars with agents, riders and bodyguards. This commercialisation killed the original spirit for many. The democratic dance floor became VIP areas and guest lists. The £3 entry became £30. The anyone welcome vibe became face control and dress codes. But it also meant proper ventilation, free water and security that wasn't connected to drug dealers. Let's not romanticise it entirely. The 90s party scene had a body count. Leah Betts, Anna Wood, Daniel Ashton, young people who went out for a good time and never came home. The media portrayed every death as proof that rave culture was evil. The come-downs were brutal too. Suicide Tuesday wasn't just a dark joke, it was a mental health crisis that nobody talked about. The serotonin depletion from weekend excess left thousands of young Britons clinically depressed every week. Some never recovered. The scene that promised unity and love could be incredibly isolating when the drugs wore off and real life crashed back in. The exploitation ran deeper than just mental health. Young women faced predatory behaviour in environments where intoxication was normalised and security was minimal. The peace, love, unity, respect mantra couldn't protect against sexual assault in dark corners of illegal venues. Many survivors never reported incidents, knowing they'd be blamed for being at an illegal event while under the influence. Financial exploitation was rampant too. Promoters who preached anti-establishment values often paid workers nothing while pocketing thousands. DJs played for exposure, while organisers drove away in new BMWs. The illegal nature meant no contracts, no rights, no recourse. The environmental impact was devastating. Pristine countryside trashed, ancient woodlands damaged by thousands of cars and feet, local communities terrorised by convoys of ravers descending without warning. Perhaps most tragically, the scene's drug casualties weren't limited to overdoses. Thousands developed long-term mental health conditions, addiction issues, and cognitive problems from sustained MDMA abuse. The culture that celebrated excess never prepared people for the consequences of taking pills every weekend for years on end. But here's the thing. Despite the authorities' best efforts, they couldn't kill the spirit. The Criminal Justice Act didn't stop repetitive beats, it just moved them into legal venues. The superclubs might have become corporate, but they also became launching pads for British DJs to conquer the world. That illegal rave in a field, it evolved into Glastonbury's dance village and Creamfields. The true legacy is in British culture itself. The 90s party scene broke down class barriers in a way politics never could. It created a generation comfortable with diversity, suspicious of authority, and convinced that the best nights of your life happen when someone, somewhere, decides to break the rules. Today's British nightlife, from Printworks to Warehouse Project, stands on the shoulders of those muddy ravers. The music industry worth billions started with kids breaking into buildings. The DJ worship that seems normal now was revolutionary then. Even the way Brits party, late, hard and slightly mental, was shaped by those years when dancing itself was an act of rebellion. So what was it really like to party in 90s Britain? It was transformative, it was dangerous, it was the last true youth revolution in British history. While previous generations had rock and roll or punk, 90s kids had something more powerful, a complete alternative society that existed from Friday night to Monday morning. Those warehouses and fields weren't just party venues, they were laboratories for a new way of being British, less divided, more open, definitely more fun. Yes, it went wrong. Yes, people got hurt. Yes, it got commercialised. But for one brief, glorious decade, British youth created something from nothing and changed the culture forever. The authorities called it criminal. The tabloids called it evil. History calls it essential. Because every time you hear electronic music in a British advert, see a DJ headlining a festival, or watch young people queue for a club without fighting, you're seeing the legacy of those brave, foolish, beautiful kids who thought dancing could change the world. Maybe they were right. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video.